Good morning. Thank you for coming. There's lots of sessions going on at the moment about Java, and here we are at a Java conference in a session about JavaScript. This is kind of the place where things are. My name is Geertjan Wielenga. I have a long history in Java, and I have a long history of being very skeptical about JavaScript, about the language, about the ecosystem, about its stability, about its usefulness. And yet, over the past years, I've been exploring JavaScript quite a bit in a number of different enterprise contexts. And I want to share some findings, some insights, some tips and tricks. You'll see that I'm still quite skeptical, and I'm specifically going to be talking about JavaScript on the front end. So JavaScript as a front-end technology, not using Java or some abstraction over JavaScript, but using pure native JavaScript to code the front end of applications. So browser-based applications. Well, I mean, I'm really a big promoter and advocate of the Java desktop. I really think it's a fantastic place to develop applications. However, clearly the interest in JavaScript and the browser over the past years has exploded immensely, and it makes sense to ask ourselves the question whether JavaScript is stable and reliable enough to use within the enterprise context, or whether it's only relevant maybe for prototypes and for games, and which are all valid, but which are not enterprise contexts. So I want to explore the context of the enterprise as a relevant place for JavaScript development. The first thing I want to show you is an app created at Tesco. And it's a new app that's been launched within Tesco, so the big supermarket chain in the UK, for the internal employees of Tesco to manage their time schedules. It's a time scheduling app. And the managers can see whether the staff are present or not. They can see exceptions, so this is a big deal for this particular app. They can see whether the employees have clocked in and clocked out or not. And what's also very interesting about this is that the employees are able to put time slots on a marketplace and make them available to others if they can't make their particular time slot. And managers are able to put time slots onto an internal marketplace and say, hey, there's a time slot coming up in which there isn't enough staff. Who is available? Who wants to bid on that time slot? This is an enterprise context. This is Tesco. And of course, this is only the front end. Behind this, there's all kinds of other processes going on, and validation and automation and analysis and so on. But at the end of the day, we have an app, a UI, in the browser, on a mobile device, which everyone has, and it makes sense to have the application there where the users are on their mobile phones. And this is what you see all the time. I mean, the browser, in terms of platforms, has won the war. If there was a war, the browser has won. The browser is on your mobile device, on your tablet, on your laptop, on your desktop. It's everywhere. Browser is everywhere. The native language of the browser is JavaScript. A logical question to ask is, can we use JavaScript natively within the context of the browser to create the front ends of our applications? Another example, Kraken.js. Very interesting. Go to krakenjs.com. This is a framework created on top of Node.js, so JavaScript on the back end, and Express.js. On top of that, this new framework, or newish framework called Kraken has been created. And what is interesting about this is that it's created by PayPal. So I was at a conference, there was a VP of PayPal doing a keynote to a large group of developers. And the question I had was, what does PayPal have to say to developers? Now, it turns out PayPal has an open source division. And they have an internal framework on top of Node, on top of Express that they've developed and that they've open sourced, Kraken.js. This enables them to go to conferences and talk about their open source organization and attract developers to work for them. Because if there's one area, if there's one job segment where there is an incredible demand right now, it is in software development. So all these different large enterprises want a piece of that. They want to go to conferences and they want to attract new developers. So PayPal is doing that. It has this framework, open sourced, enabling it to go to conferences, enabling it to attract developers, enabling it to say, look, come and join us, work with us, use our framework, which is all JavaScript. It's not proprietary, it's open source. Everything you learn here you can reuse in your next job, because no one believes you'll be working for us for the next 30 years, but the next 2 or 3 years. So the skills that you pick up with us, you'll be able to use in your next place of employment. The same thing is true for Tesco. Tesco has also adopted JavaScript on the front end with a specific aim of attracting new cool developers coming from technical colleges, universities, and so on, enabling them to say to these new upcoming developers, join us, you will not need to learn some proprietary framework or language or something that we've created for ourselves that will lock you in with your knowledge within Tesco. Instead of that, come and use your JavaScript skills within the set of tools and technologies that we are using, which are also JavaScript-based. So this is all really interesting, and you can see the enterprise becoming more and more involved around JavaScript for these different reasons. For the fact of the browser being everywhere, JavaScript being the language of the browser, developers increasingly being focused on JavaScript themselves, enterprises wanting developers competing with each other for the cool developers, learning the new technologies, learning the new frameworks and libraries all around JavaScript. This is a picture from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam, where I'm from. And you see here the most famous Dutch painting, The Night Watch by Rembrandt. And in front of it, you see a row of kids engaged with their mobile devices and with their backs turned to this amazing piece of art. When this was first tweeted around a couple of years ago, especially in the Netherlands, of course, this almost caused a major scandal. You know, what does this say about our youth? That they are more interested in their mobile devices than in great art. You know, that was kind of the question. And you know, it's a metaphor for our age. We are all distracted. We're not focusing on art and on literature and so on anymore, and it's the end of the world, etc. However, in the meantime, this kind of picture doesn't surprise us anymore, and also we are not assuming anymore that these kids are necessarily focused on Facebook, because in fact they weren't. What they were doing is they were using the museum app to learn about the paintings that they had just been seeing. So they were, a few seconds before that, in the other picture, looking at other paintings by Rembrandt and the other great Dutch masters, and engaged. So all these mobile apps are not necessarily, in the way that we saw some years ago, or feared some years ago, a way for people to end up being distracted from reality, but it's a way to engage people in reality. This is something that we are, in the meantime, over the past years, more and more aware of and focused on, of mobile apps and mobile devices and so on, being a way of engaging in reality rather than as being a way for us to be distracted from it. So I'm really not an advocate of JavaScript as such. I'm very skeptical about JavaScript as a language. It's missing type system, for example, and of course we have TypeScript, and it's missing this, and of course there is that, and that's exactly the problem with JavaScript, that for every single problem that we have in that ecosystem, there is a solution, or there are multiple different solutions. There are just too many solutions. There is so much innovation going on, which is another reason for there to be a problem in the context of the enterprise, where we would prefer things to be stable and reliable and not change every few months. We don't want to learn a new library and then find out 2 weeks or 2 months later that it's no longer being developed and so on. So these kinds of concerns are very typical in the JavaScript landscape. I'm really a Java platform advocate where we have reliability, stability, specifications. We know what's coming. We know where to go to find out more. There is, a clear source of information. There are clear discussions. There's a very clear, well-established community. Things aren't going to fall over tomorrow. Anything in the JavaScript ecosystem seems to be up for grabs. You commit yourself to a particular framework. You're locked in. And then the new release of the framework comes out, and it turns out everything is broken, and you have to basically rewrite your application. And then the framework owner says, well, we can't help that because the browser has changed, providing us new opportunities, so we have to improve our framework, and as a result, your code is now broken. Those are kind of the completely different dynamics with which we need to deal. And the question is, can we deal with that? Can we cater to that? Can we incorporate those dynamics within the context of the enterprise? Choice, it's great. JavaScript ecosystem is full of choice. Every conference you go to, you learn about completely new frameworks, completely new libraries you never heard of before. You start learning about them, and the guy who wrote that library in their basement, when you have a question for them, turns out is working on a whole new library about which they're very excited about today. And there's no community around this cool library that you're using, and you're stuck. These dynamics are the ones that you're inevitably confronted with. JavaScript happens. It's basically the situation. So I want to handle this context within 10 basic building blocks for dealing with the complexity and the specificity of the JavaScript ecosystem. So first, I want to talk about resisting the hype for some time. Secondly, we should, I think, rediscover HTML5. There is more in that than you might think. Then I want to compare responsive design between what CSS provides and what JavaScript provides. And you might be very surprised to discover that CSS is less cool than you might think, and that JavaScript is actually quite powerful in exactly the areas where you think CSS is well suited. Then the big bear that you need to deal with sooner or later, evaluating the framework approach, where you go in for a particular, you go in full on in a particular direction, versus the approach of choosing small libraries and combining them together as the basis of your architecture. Then the aspect of modularity, which is unavoidable if you're in the enterprise. You're not creating toy applications. You want applications that are well structured. So you want some concept of modularity. We will then look briefly at abstractions over the bare JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. Talk a little bit more about the volatility of the ecosystem. Introduce you to a new concept. Instead of write once, run anywhere, you'll learn a new one. Wanta instead of wara. Look at a few of the corporate frameworks, and then maybe reconsider JavaScript, not necessarily as a programming language, but as an assembly language. And if that is the case, what are the consequences of that? So in the first place, resisting the hype. There's this big bowl of cookies, and looking great and juicy, and everyone's talking about JavaScript, and you think, let's move away from prime faces or whatever it is that you're using on the front end, and let's go for a JavaScript-based solution. And not just prime faces. Let's say you have some Java desktop system. For example, an air traffic control system. You have an air traffic control system. There are lots of air traffic control systems in the world. There are lots of simulator-type software. There's lots of logistics software. There's a lot of analysis-related software that is perfectly well-suited to the Java desktop. And the users of that software are not asking for their application to be in the browser. There's no air traffic controller saying, I want my air traffic control system to be in the browser. And the developers of those systems don't want that application in the browser either. But it's typically a management-driven process where the management of either or both the users and the developer says, well, obviously we need to be in the browser now because that's where all the applications are, and there's no need to install anything. How better can it be? In the case of, for example, an air traffic control system, typically these systems are very bespoke, very customized, written specifically for a group of 10 air traffic controllers working in the same room, in the same air traffic control tower. And typically the developers of that software are sitting in a room below that same air traffic control tower, writing that software for those controllers. It's a very specific context. Large resolution, obviously, you don't want to have your air traffic control system on a mobile device. There are all kinds of contexts where the Java desktop or the desktop in general, but of course the Java desktop in particular for being free, open source, and cross-platform is the ideal place for software to be. The first tip I would suggest is, if the discussion comes up, shouldn't we move our system from the place where it is on the desktop to the browser, where it apparently should be because all applications are apparently going there? Make the suggestion to not rewrite the application, but to supplement the application. Make a mobile app to receive some warnings and notifications for the managers if something seriously wrong is going to happen in the air traffic control system, for example. Make a web report in the browser to display statistics. Keep the system as close to what it is and supplement it with these new modern materials. Try and make that argument, rather than making the argument of desktop versus browser. Try and supplement, try and bring these two worlds together, because all these different options provide opportunities to do the right thing for the users and for the developers. And if the right arguments are made to the management layer, then this kind of hybrid context might be one that could work, as opposed to moving everything to the browser, finding out doesn't work in the end, no one's happy, and having to move back, or being in a seriously problematic situation, which does happen. So that would be tip number one. So tip number two, before even looking at JavaScript, before looking at all these different interesting components that JavaScript provides, make sure that you understand what HTML5 provides. So HTML5, so natively in the browser, in the DOM, you have a bunch of elements and attributes that you might not be aware of. So typically, when we think about HTML, originally, of course, it was designed as a language for marking up scientific documents, and the H1s and the H2s and so on. And the push for HTML5 came about as a result of the demands for the whole multimedia experience. You don't only see text in the browser anymore, but you see much more. So there was this call for video and for audio and for these kinds of elements. However, there is more in HTML5 which is often hidden, not talked about, because what is cool, of course, is the multimedia parts. But in addition to the multimedia parts, there are a bunch of elements and attributes that are very relevant to application development. Now, for example, validation is built in to attributes in HTML5, and there are elements that provide full-blown components that you might have been creating or thinking of creating via, for example, jQuery. So if you're, for example, creating calendar components and date picker type components, at least be aware that HTML5 itself natively supports those. Maybe not as full-blown as what you're busily putting together, but at least explore what HTML5 itself natively provides. And these are the key principles of HTML5. First of all new features that are added to the specification should be based on HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. No plugins, for example, no Flash. Error handling, so that's really an application development type feature. Scripting replaced by markup, and of course, device independence, because we're interested in mobile phones. So here, a very simple example. We have here an input element, as we've always had an input element in HTML. It's got an ID, it's got a name, it's got a type is text, it's got an interesting attribute there, required, and it's got an attribute list, which is new as well, so the required is new, so this will provide validation. So you will see a red mark if it's left empty, and then you see a list attribute with its value set to country, which not coincidentally is the same value as the ID of the data list below it. So data list is also a new element. Data list is a new element, list is a new attribute, required is a new attribute, and via that ID in data list and the list attribute in the input element, these two are connected together, and we have a auto-completion box. Now, how does that look in practice? To show you that it's actually real and not just my slide. So I'm just dropping this in here, and here are the relevant parts. We have here an input field. What is that? Space here. An input element with this required attribute, which is standard HTML5, and the list attribute, which connects this input element to a data list which has its ID set to the same value. Okay, so let's run this and take a look. So open it in the browser, and here we see so you can see immediately we didn't do anything for this. We just said input and data list, and as my mouse moves over that input, it becomes a drop down, and here I can see all the items that are in there, and as I type, there's automatically filtering built in. So you can see if I type AL, you can see just those two countries pop up, and select one, and in this case submit, and I've added some code to process this. But this entire functionality is built into the browser. So all browsers that support HTML5 automatically have the possibility of making use of the code completion item that HTML5 provides natively. No JavaScript needed. It's just built in. Take a look, therefore, at HTML5. Take another look at the specification, look at all the elements that are in there that relate specifically to application development, and forget about the multimedia stuff, because in the context of the enterprise, okay, maybe we would have one or two multimedia elements at most, some audio, video, but we want to have components for displaying data and for choosing data, and such drop-downs and code completions are useful. A third tip is take a look again at CSS, and also look at JavaScript alternatives, specifically for responsive design. So the interesting thing about the CSS3 specification, not only is it modular, which is new in CSS3, but the most widely known CSS3 module deals with responsive design via media queries. So again, the original purpose of CSS was completely different to what it has now been changed to support, because now we have multiple different devices, and CSS is an ideal choice, one might think, for doing media queries, for saying, well, if the resolution is like this, then show this like this, or show this logo under this resolution, and show this under that resolution, and kind of tailoring the application to different resolutions. However, there is a typical point of confusion. What media queries actually do is not what you think, or not what I thought. I assumed that when I didn't see something as a result of CSS3, it would mean that those particular DOM elements that are now not shown are actually unloaded from the DOM, but they're not. They're simply hidden. JavaScript libraries, alternatively, so response and foundation interchange. So I have here response.js.com is a great tip, a JavaScript library, and foundation interchange. Foundation provides a lot of different things, but part of it is this aspect of responsive design provides some very nice solutions. I'll show this by means of a very small demo. So here is an application. We imagine I'm creating an application for Coca-Cola. It's not finished, clearly, but here it is. There is a logo at the top, and you can see that we are using a large resolution that's printed in this text here. Now, if this were to be on a smartphone portrait, so this is on a mobile phone portrait. Let's make it smaller. So imagine in our design, we think, well, when we are on a mobile phone, this big logo takes up too much real estate. Let's hide it under those conditions. We don't want to show that at all. Or alternatively, we have a Google map displayed in our web browser, but on our mobile phone, we don't want to load that Google map. We want to use the native map of the mobile phone. So what's actually going on here? I'm going to just connect these two together and put these two next to each other so we can see them at the same time. So we can inspect what's going on when we run that application. Okay, here we go. We connect them together. And what I have on the bottom left here is a live browser DOM. So I can see what's happening live in the browser. So for example, I select this text here, or I select this over here. You can see that in that browser DOM, the related item is selected, okay? So these two are connected to each other, great. So now let's analyze what's going on with that, this little logo up here. So here it is. So this is a live view into the browser, and here is the logo. So now let's say that we have a smaller resolution. What happens to that logo? You can see it disappears. It's loaded and it's unloaded. So here we have 4 divs, the first one being the one that contains our logo, and then 3 other ones. Once we become smaller, one of those 4 divs disappears, the one with the logo, and that's it. Now, this would not happen if I was using CSS3 media queries. If I was using CSS3 media queries, I would still see that logo in the DOM. These would not be removed, they would still be there, and I would simply not see in the browser, while the item would still be in the DOM. And why is this all possible? Well, that's because I'm using these JavaScript libraries instead of using CSS3 media queries. In the case of the logo, I'm using, so here's a data bind, so this is a knockout JS notation, and here's a variable. If not, we are small, and here is that variable defined. You can see that there is a variable here, we are small, an observable variable handled by knockout, and there is here this response.js. So we create 3 breakpoints provided by response.js.com. So include response.js in your application, response.create, 3 breakpoints, and here's the action. So if we are in this particular resolution, then set that variable to true, and if we are in the other resolution, set it to false. And then based on that, we either show or hide that particular logo. In the case of the texts, so you could see that when we changed the resolution, the text changed. Here, a different solution is used. We could also use response.js, but here, foundation interchange is used. And again, we have 3 breakpoints, small, medium, and large. And these are defined by foundation interchange. And if those are hit, depending on which resolution is hit, a different HTML page is shown. And again, the loading and the unloading is handled by this JavaScript library. So that would be my next tip to, if you're doing responsive design with CSS3 media queries, consider whether what you really want to achieve is loading and unloading rather than showing and hiding, and if that's what you're trying to achieve, look at JavaScript alternatives to CSS. Okay, so then the big question of the day is always, which of the many libraries out there do we choose? And there are just heaps of JavaScript libraries, and you can make the mistake of putting them all into some kind of Google Trends or job search matrix, which I think is always very misleading because, for example, a Google Trends tends to show you what searches people are doing, which doesn't necessarily mean what people are actually using. Just because I'm searching on a particular term, on a particular library, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm using that particular library. It might show an interest in that library, but it could mean that there are millions of people looking at the library and all rejecting it, for all we know. All these different trend matrices and so on are just very, very misleading. And also, conferences are very misleading. And typically, you find out what the new and current and hyped things of the moment are, which is often very different to what is actually useful and being done in the workplace. Based on conferences, you would think that Java Swing is completely dead because there are no sessions on Java Swing. But everywhere you go, there are these fantastically large back-office analysis systems doing great work on the Java desktop. So be very careful with conference-based analysis and Google Trends and these kinds of things. It's hard to know. Ultimately, the thing to do is to pick the one probably where there is a clear community around. Is there a community around to help you? When you ask questions, do they actually help you, or are they rude and impolite and unhelpful? Is there documentation? Are there examples of others who have done something with this particular solution? Probably those kinds of questions are ones to consider and to ask, when was the last piece of news published on the website of that particular product and things like that? Or was there lots of activity 7 years ago and almost nothing today? Might also indicate something. So probably these kinds of questions are the ones to ask. But there are so many libraries out there that it's of course a really interesting, innovative place. And maybe all these different libraries and frameworks and so on will slow down over time. But until then, you spend some time learning Grunt, and then you're very happy building your JavaScript application in Grunt, and someone tells you, yes, but you should be using Gulp, of course, because Gulp is the cool thing, and then you learn Gulp, and then there's something called Brunch. So Brunch is the new Gulp. And so then you have to learn Brunch, and it's all very nice and interesting. But at some point, you need to make choices about which of these different solutions to use and which ones work well together. That's also when you reappreciate the whole Java ecosystem, where we've decided all of these things together. We've decided, okay, these are the APIs, these are the implementations, these are the servers. It's all very clear and open and discussed as a community. At some point, you will be organizing all the different frameworks and libraries and so on into different categories like this, and all the different libraries, frameworks, UI components, and so on, module systems, build systems, testing frameworks. And the big question at some point will be, should I go with Angular or should I go for a library approach? What I'm clearly seeing is that just from my experience from going to conferences and talking to people, no, it's purely anecdotal, that a lot of people are taking the opportunity with Angular 2 coming out of looking for something different. Since Angular 2 is so different to Angular 1, a lot of organizations are saying, okay, if we have to rewrite our application to Angular 2 anyway, maybe we should look at something else. And a lot of organizations are looking at React right now, because that's an interesting one, backed by an organization, backed by Facebook. So that's something that's a reliable thing to do. On the other hand, Angular and Google was, so it's always a question. Do you go for a particular framework, a particular direction? On the other hand, of course, every application in this space is rewritten anyway every couple of years. So all these different aspects are there to be weighed up. The alternative is to take a couple of libraries, and you think, I'd rather not go for this full stack framework thing because I'll get things I don't really need. I'll choose a few libraries and build on top of that. That's a different approach. Incorporate modularity, of course. Loose coupling, communication, both sides happy and not too tightly coupled, just a string between them. Kind of approach. JavaScript for a very long time didn't have modularity, of course, with ECMAScript 6. This is coming, or this is part of the ECMAScript 6 specification. There have been other solutions in the meantime, Require.js, Browserify, System.js used by Angular. So look at some way of breaking up an application into smaller pieces. Another aspect to look at is, rather than coding natively in JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, looking at layers slightly above that and abstractions. So, for example, TypeScript that we talk about all the time at Java conferences, and I'm kind of curious whether, to what extent TypeScript is popular outside of the Java community, because this is typically something that Java developers miss in JavaScript, while most JavaScript developers are happy not to have types. So it's one of those things. CoffeeScript and other scripting layers on top of JavaScript, Sass and Less for CSS. So super awesome style sheets. Great thing to include a complement in the name of your product. Super awesome style sheets and Less. So two different CSS post-processors. Emmet, a great little tool to use, supported by all the IDEs, where by means of which you can quickly generate lots of HTML code with small snippets in your editor. This I've pointed to a couple of times already. Don't worry about the volatility of the ecosystem. And the corollary is, if you are worried, ask yourself whether this is the right place for your software system. So it changes all the time. It's just a fact of life. the question is whether it will ever stabilize. And the question is whether you should want it to stabilize, given that it's focused on the browser, and the browser is constantly improving and being enhanced, whether it's the kind of ecosystem that can stabilize. So here are some aspects of all of this. The lifespan of your app equals the lifespan of the framework that you're using. And if that isn't true for your application, if you're thinking, well, my app is going to have to exist for the next 20 years, I don't want to have to rewrite it, maybe JavaScript is the wrong place for what you're doing. However, if you're thinking, well, I'm going to write for example, mobile apps are often quite small and focused on a particular function. I want to write my mobile app, publish it to the App Store, write the next mobile app. When I have a feature request for my first app, I write a new app. And if you're that kind of cycle, that really quick development cycle for smallish mobile apps, this might be a good place. So, the right tools for the right job. There are some consequences. If you know that your app doesn't need to be maintained forever, and if it's just you and one other person maybe working on the code, maintainability and readability are less of a concern. It's a worrisome development, but maybe that's the way it is for this class of applications. Not for the aerospace, NASA-type Boeing systems, but for these kinds of applications, this might be the reason why things are hard to read, because they don't need to be read by too many people other than those who are writing it. It's a constantly changing scenario. So don't worry. That's really how it is. And this leads to a related item, which is the Wanta versus Wara topic. And here is an illustration. Instead of write once, run anywhere, write once, never touch again. So this is kind of the mode in which a lot of the applications in this JavaScript ecosystem are written. And again, if that doesn't fit the kind of software that you're working on, then maybe this is the wrong place for it. So, importantly, evaluate what corporations are doing. There's a lot of corporate frameworks out there. Microsoft, IBM, Salesforce, SAP. ING has a really interesting project called Spectingular. So ING is my bank, and they have a nice website with orange coloring and their logos and so on. If you want to use those same kinds of logos and so on, you can go to github.com/Spectingular. So ING is in there, and it's an Angular-based component framework that you can use as the basis of your architecture. PayPal, I've mentioned already, Kraken, JS.com. Oracle, so I want to briefly tell you what's going on in Oracle in this particular landscape. Something called Oracle Jet, the Oracle JavaScript extension toolkit, oraclejet.org. It's a collection of libraries. So if you're using jQuery, jQuery UI, Knockout, and Require, you are actually already using Oracle Jet, because that is the basis of an Oracle Jet application. I seem to not be plugged in. Okay. Okay. So if you're using those libraries already, then that's an Oracle Jet application. And there are a bunch of graphs and charts, and getting started with it is quite easy. You use Yeoman on the command line. Instead of Yo Angular, you can use Yo Oracle Jet, which will set up your application for you. There's a cookbook with a wide range of different components written on jQuery UI. So these are jQuery UI widgets, which you can cut and paste into your application, because these are literally recipes. So if I wanted to use this chart on my application, here is a require.js module. I can cut from here the relevant code and paste it into my application. And here is the view of that. So each module, it's a modular toolkit. Each module consists of a view in HTML and business logic in JavaScript, where the JavaScript is in a require.js module. And you can update this component live in the browser, so you can see that there are buttons along the bottom here for tweaking how, for the user, how the chart looks, but we imagine we don't want to do that, so right in this browser, I can just cut out this HTML section here and delete it. and then click Apply, and those buttons are gone. So now I have exactly what I need, and this I can just copy into my application, and I have a chart, and I connect this chart to other components by means of knockout. So it's a collection of different libraries put together in a logical manner, tested together as a whole, which can be used as the basis of applications. To visualize data, it's purely a front-end solution responding to the typical requirements for modern applications. So responsive design, modularity, single-page application architecture, accessibility requirements, internationalization. So here is a quick example of an application created by means of Oracle Jet, which has support for different languages. So we switch to a different language, and you can see that also the tooltips on this date picker, which is one of the components written on jQuery UI created by Oracle as part of Oracle Jet. And these components are open sourced on GitHub. So if you go to github.com/Oracle Jet, you will see all the components that are part of Oracle Jet listed here. And you can incorporate them into any application you want. They're free and they're open source. And you can take them and drop them into an Angular application, for example. These are just jQuery UI widgets. And here I have a date picker, and you can see that when I switch to a different language, these tooltips automatically update because there is translation bundles included for all the components. And if I switch to Arabic, you can see that I have right to left support automatically. And these kinds of things are very easy to define. These kinds of typical enterprise problems are easy to solve within the context of Oracle Jet, because this is a toolkit created to be used within Oracle. So all the organizations within Oracle, if they are working with JavaScript, are doing it in the same way, using the same libraries, using this toolkit that's been created and has been open sourced. So there's oraclejet.org, Oracle Jet Twitter, there's Facebook, it's on GitHub. It's not a framework, it's a bunch of different libraries, and everything is open source. It's actively used. About 70% of the front ends of Oracle Cloud products make use of Oracle Jet solutions. It's very widely established at this point at Oracle. And the Tesco app I showed at the start of the story is also created in Oracle Jet. So this is an external organization. They've created this internal time management system, time scheduling app for their employees, mobile app, on the App Store and so on, using Oracle Jet to do that. There are graphs and charts, and these kinds of dashboard applications can be created by means of this toolkit. The final point I want to make is, especially from a Java background, we might consider JavaScript in a new light. JavaScript might not be a language for programming for us, but it simply could be seen as an assembly language. And then you think, well, how is JavaScript assembly language? Well, this is assembly language. How is JavaScript assembly language? Well, take a look. This is JavaScript, right? This is JavaScript. Is this something you want to code yourself? Okay, I've cheated a bit. It's minimized and et cetera, et cetera. But as a Java programmer, looking at JavaScript as something to code in, as an environment for coding, might not be the ideal thing for you. So there are definitely a number of solutions for getting around this. And there is an interesting site on GitHub. Here it is. GitHub, here it is not. Here it is. GitHub.com, here's the whole URL. List of languages that compile to JavaScript. So there is not one programming language imaginable that does not in some way provide support for compiling to JavaScript. Of course, because again, everyone wants to be in the browser, and JavaScript is the native language of the browser. So all the programming languages of the world have a pathway from their language to JavaScript. In Java, Google Web Toolkit, Vaadin on top of that. Other ones to look at are Gluon, Codename1, and JavaScript. So these are four interesting different solutions. Vaadin.com, always very well represented at conferences. You get a free book at the stand on the exhibition floor. Gluon, rapid enterprise mobile apps development. You can, mobile app development with Gluon. JavaScript has a similar solution. Codename1 is another technology enabling you to do that. So what is interesting about JavaScript is that it is a collection of different solutions. So the starting point for JavaScript is to say, look, on the desktop we have Java via Hotspot, and on Android we have Java via Dalvik, and on iOS we have something, RoboVM or the next thing on iOS, and on the web there is a transpiler created by the JavaScript team, transpiling from Java to JavaScript. So there's, we have Java on all those different devices. And we have some view technology on all the different devices. We have Chrome on the web, and we have, on the desktop, we have the Java Flex Web View, and we have the Android view, and we have the iOS view. Let's bundle all of those together. So that's really what JavaScript does via Maven archetypes. So you can use a Maven command line, sets up your Maven project for you, compiles from the same Java code down to all these different platforms. So it's an interesting technology to look at if you want to stay within the Java programming language while still targeting the browser. And it's definitely a different approach to Google Web Toolkit and Vaadin. Also, what is interesting about JavaScript is that the view in JavaScript is written in HTML and the business logic in Java. So the separation enables the same advantage of standard JavaScript development, where you hand off your HTML view to a web designer to design the view, gives it back to you, and with JavaScript you connect that back into the business logic. With JavaScript you can do the same thing, but with Java. Hand off the view to a designer, get it back, and hook it back into your Java business logic. So it's a really attractive, very natural feel for Java developers. So with very few minutes left over, these were the building blocks I would suggest in the context of considering the relevance of JavaScript in the enterprise. First of all, try and avoid it. Try and avoid full-blown rewriting of everything to JavaScript. Try and see where it makes sense. Make the argument for these other devices being incorporated. Look at HTML5 again. Look at JavaScript. Compare it to CSS, especially for media queries. JavaScript does much more. Consider whether to go with the framework, which is Angular, the framework, or consider a more library-based approach. And one of the library-based approaches is Oracle Jet. So in the case of Oracle Jet, it's a clear choice. A couple of libraries, let's put them together, let's test them together, let's use them together. In the case of Oracle, inside Oracle, very broadly used. And that's a different approach. Include modularity, definitely, to break up the application into smaller parts for the developers, for the end users. Look at these other tools on top of the standard languages. Try and deal with the fact that everything changes. So make sure the architecture is open to change. Make sure that you have an architecture that in 3 months or 6 months or 2 years' time, the pieces within it, the libraries that you are using, can be replaced with other libraries and with other technologies and so on. How open are you to change? Because if there's one ecosystem where there is constant change, it's JavaScript. So please take care when trading in this landscape. Write once, never touch again. Is that kind of the place where you're at? Look at what the corporations are doing. It's really interesting that, this wasn't true a couple of years ago, but now the large organizations, IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, and so on, are all making a play for the JavaScript space, or providing tools in the JavaScript landscape, or providing solutions, because all their customers are asking for solutions here too. And so it really shows that JavaScript at least is maturing. It's not stabilizing, it's still very full of innovation, but it's maturing in the sense that it's being taken seriously by large enterprises. Finally, if JavaScript as a programming language is a blocker for you taking part in this whole landscape, consider the transpiler option, and these are very well supported by a number of different technologies. So this is my Twitter handle, Geertjan W. I'm a product manager working in Oracle, specifically on Oracle Jet, open source solution. So if you have any questions about that in particular, very happy to help. I have an email and a blog. Thank you very much.